My neighbor sent me 3 words in all caps and my entire body went cold. Someone had just walked into my apartment using my roommate's key, and she was still in Hawaii. I was on the couch with Bruno when I heard the key turn in the lock. Not a knock, not a buzz from downstairs. The key. Sliding in clean, the tumblers clicking over like they always did, the handle depressing with that familiar resistance before the door swung wide. I'd heard that sound 1,000 times. I knew it the way you know your own heartbeat. Thoughtless, automatic, background noise. Bruno lifted his head from my knee. "I'm home finally." The voice was perfect, bright, a little ragged around the edges, that exact pitch of someone surfacing from 10 days of airports and beach humidity and someone else's schedule. I'd heard Sarah come through that door after long weekends before. This was exactly how she sounded. The same sing-song relief, the same slight drop at the end of the sentence, like the words themselves were exhaling. I was already half off the couch, ready to ask about the flight, when my phone lit up on the cushion beside me. Carol Patton, 3B, 62 years old, had lived in this building longer than anyone else on our floor, had opinions about the elevator maintenance schedule, and had shared Tuesday and Thursday morning coffee with Sarah in our kitchen for the better part of 14 months. 3 words, all caps. "That's not her." I stopped moving. The door had already swung all the way open. The woman in the frame was pulling a wheeled carry-on behind her, the kind with the telescoping handle and the scuff marks on the lower corner. Sarah's exact travel style. She was the right height, the right build. Shoulder-length blonde hair, a little flat from a long flight, wearing the kind of loose linen joggers and oversized tee that Sarah always traveled in. She smiled when she saw me. "Hey, that flight was brutal. I'm dead." Bruno did not move. He didn't go to her the way he always went to Sarah. That full-body wag, the whimpering greeting, the shoving of his enormous German shepherd head into her thigh. He sat rigid beside my legs, every muscle locked. His lips had pulled back just slightly, exposing the front edge of his teeth, and from somewhere low in his chest came a sound I'd heard exactly once before, when a man had tried to force the lobby door open at 2 in the morning last January. "What's wrong with him?" She glanced at Bruno, then back at me. "Is he okay?" The question was flat. It wasn't worried, wasn't soft. It was the question you'd ask about a stranger's dog that was behaving oddly. Sarah had lived with Bruno for 18 months. She brought him sweet potato chews from the organic market on Clement Street. She talked to him in a voice she thought I couldn't hear, high-pitched and ridiculous and full of love. She would never have looked at him from that distance and asked if he was okay. She would have been on her knees with her hands on his face. I kept my voice completely even. "How was your sister's new place? She just moved, right?" Her face opened up like a door. She launched into it immediately. Beachfront condo in Maui. Incredible view from the lanai. Snorkeling at sunrise. Watching the sunset over the water with a glass of wine. Vivid, confident, layered with sensory detail. The kind of description that sounds like memory. Sarah's sister lived in a cramped studio apartment in downtown Honolulu. No beach, no lanai. I'd been there when Sarah helped her move in. I'd spent 45 minutes trying to angle a couch through a doorway that was 3 inches too narrow. The neighborhood was a grid of office buildings and takeout places and traffic. There was not a single ocean view in any direction. This woman had just answered a question she didn't know was a trap. "I need to take Bruno out," I said. "He's too worked up." She stepped aside. I clipped Bruno's leash with fingers that felt like they belonged to someone else and walked out the door and down the hallway without looking back. The walk to Carol's door took maybe 15 seconds. It felt like crossing a lake on ice you weren't sure would hold. She had her door open before I knocked. She grabbed my forearm and pulled me inside. Her apartment smelled like chamomile and paperback spines and something baking low in the oven. She pushed the door shut without making a sound and turned to me. "I was coming back from the mailboxes," she said, voice barely above a whisper. I saw her come out of the elevator and I was about to say hello. I had my hand raised. She stopped. And then something, I don't know how to explain it, the way she was moving, the expression, not quite right, like watching a film where the sound is off by half a second. She pressed her phone into my hand. I took this from the peephole. The photo was slightly distorted from the fisheye lens, but the face was there. Then she swiped to another photo. Sarah, taken at the building's rooftop barbecue last July, laughing at something off-frame. Similar, genuinely similar. The same general architecture of features, but not the same, like a sister, or a very careful copy of a photograph. I called Sarah's number. Voicemail. Again, voicemail. A third time. Voicemail. Carol was already on with 911. I dialed Sarah's number from Carol's phone. 2 rings. Then Sarah's voice, strained in a way I'd never heard from her, stripped of its usual warmth, scared in a way that reached through the phone and put both hands on my chest. "Hello? Who is this?" I told her to stay calm. I told her there was a woman in our apartment, that she'd used a key, that she'd claimed to be her. The pause that followed was long enough that I thought the call had dropped. "I'm still in Hawaii. My flight was canceled this afternoon. I'm rebooked for tomorrow morning at 9. Her voice dropped further. "How does someone have my key? What do you mean she's in our apartment?" I didn't have an answer. I told her to stay where she was and stay on with dispatch. The police arrived in 12 minutes. 2 officers, one of whom had worked missing persons before transferring to General Patrol, which turned out to matter. They verified Sarah's location by phone. They looked at Carol's photos. They listened to the Maui versus Honolulu discrepancy. Then they knocked on our apartment door. door. The woman answered calmly, produced a California driver's license, Sarah's name, Sarah's address, a photo that was close enough, not perfect, but close enough, to pass a casual glance. When the officer asked her date of birth, she got it right. But when he told her that the real Sarah Kwan was on the phone with dispatch at that moment, currently sitting in Terminal 2 of Honolulu International Airport, the woman's face changed. Not dramatically, not a collapse, just a subtle rearrangement, like watching a stage set shift during a blackout. One second she was composed. The next she was assessing exits. She ran, the hallway, the stairwell door, 3 steps before the second officer had her on the ground. They emptied her pockets on the hallway floor. 2 wallets, Sarah's ID in one, in the other, a different name, a different city, a credit card with a third name embossed in gold letters on the face. When they went back into the apartment and searched the coat closet, they found a backpack tucked behind my winter coats. Inside it, latex gloves still in their package, a portable document scanner no larger than a paperback, a mini laptop with a cracked corner, and a handwritten list on yellow legal paper. Account numbers, passwords, security question answers, and a column labeled in shorthand that the detective, when he arrived 40 minutes later, said he recognized from 2 prior cases. This was not opportunistic. This was not random. Someone had been studying Sarah for months. The detective opened the laptop at the kitchen table, put on a pair of gloves, and went quiet for a long time. What he found would eventually connect this woman and whoever was operating above her to a network that had targeted over 300 victims across Oregon, Washington, and Northern California over the previous 2 years. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I need to go back, because none of this makes sense without understanding who Sarah is and how someone could have gotten close enough to build a copy of her. Sarah Kwan and I had been roommates for 2 years and 3 months when this happened. We'd found each other through a housing board at UCSF, where I was finishing a master's in public health, and she was a year into a research coordinator position at a clinical lab in Mission Bay. She was 26, I was 27. Neither of us had known anyone else in the city well enough to call for help with a couch, so we'd moved into the apartment on 18th Street in the Castro with a rented van and a determination to figure it out. The apartment was a 3rd-floor 2-bedroom in a sandstone building from 1927. Good bones, slow radiators, a clawfoot tub in the bathroom that took 7 minutes to fill. Carol Patton had lived in 3B since 1989 and knew everything about the building and most things about the neighborhood. She'd introduced herself to us with a plate of shortbread the day we moved in and had never really stopped being in our lives since. Sarah and I weren't the kind of roommates who became best friends. We were something more durable than that. We divided the chores without resentment. We respected each other's rhythms. When her boyfriend broke up with her in the spring of our first year, I ordered Thai food and sat on the couch with her for 3 hours without saying anything forced. When I lost a close friend to a car accident that August, Sarah came home from work early and cleaned the entire apartment and left a note on the counter that just said, "I'm here if you want," and said nothing more until I was ready. That's the particular grammar of a good roommate. You don't perform closeness. You just don't disappear when it counts. Sarah had one significant vulnerability, and I didn't understand it was a vulnerability until afterward. She was trusting in a way that read as openness. She didn't lock her phone in public. She talked to strangers on public transit and remembered their names. She had mentioned to more than one person in passing that she was going to Hawaii in June to visit her sister, had mentioned it to people at the lab, had mentioned it to the woman at the dry cleaner on Castro Street, had mentioned it on a Tuesday morning in her building lobby to someone she'd thought was a neighbor from the 4th floor, someone she'd seen a handful of times near the elevator, someone whose face she knew but whose name she'd never gotten. She told me all of this after, in fragments, as details surfaced. The detective asked her to trace every conversation where she'd mentioned the trip. The list was longer than either of us expected. The woman who walked into our apartment was named, according to one of the IDs found on her, Denise Arroyo, 34 years old. Priors in Sacramento and Eugene for identity-related fraud. The detective described her as mid-level, not the architect of anything, but experienced enough to be given an assignment and execute it cleanly. She knew Sarah's trip dates. She knew Sarah's height and coloring and approximate build. She'd been given a key, not a copy of Sarah's key, but a bump key, the kind that works on standard residential pin tumbler locks, which described 80% of the locks on our street. She'd been told enough about Sarah's life to pass a brief inspection, but not enough. Nobody ever gives you enough. Here is the detail I keep returning to. 3 weeks before any of this happened, I came home from a long day at the library and found Sarah on the couch frowning at her phone. She said someone had called her from an unknown number, asked a few questions about her research position as if from a survey, and then hung up before she could ask who they were with. She'd thought it was weird. She'd mentioned it to me the way you mention the small strangeness of a day. We both forgot about it within the hour. The detective later told us that call was almost certainly part of the preparation. Voice recording for pitch and cadence, confirmation of details, a test, the sealing of what I understood to be possible in terms of how precisely a stranger could be studied, replicated, targeted, rose about 30 feet in a single afternoon. The escalation happened quickly after that, though quickly in this case means across weeks rather than hours. The initial arrest was clean. Denise Arroyo was taken in. But the case didn't stop there. there, because Arroyo wasn't the story. Arroyo was a thread. The detective's name was Ramos. He was methodical in a way that felt almost aggressive. Every conversation he had with me or Sarah left me with the impression that he already knew more than he was saying, and that he was testing whether our account matched what he had. I found this unsettling for the first week, and then came to understand it as competence. He didn't waste time telling you what he knew. He watched what you did with the space he left. He came back to the apartment 4 days after the arrest and sat across from me at the kitchen table with a folder he didn't open. "The laptop," he said. "Do you know who in Sarah's life has the technical capacity to set up this kind of operation?" I told him I didn't understand what he was asking. He explained slowly. The data on that laptop wasn't stolen randomly. It had been curated. Someone had prioritized Sarah, had decided she was worth targeting, and had enough information about her digital footprint, her routines, her accounts, to build a substantial profile. That didn't happen from a cold approach. That required a starting point. Someone who knew Sarah, or knew enough about her to know what she had and where she kept it. Sarah, when Ramos asked her the same question, said nothing for a long time. Then she said her ex-boyfriend's name, Marcus Webb. She dated Marcus for 11 months, ending 8 months before the incident. He worked in tech, not security, not anything shady on the surface, but he was technically proficient, and he had, during their relationship, helped Sarah set up her phone and her laptop and her password manager. He knew which bank she used. He'd helped her refinance a small personal loan in the fall of their first year together. He'd known her sister's name and where she lived. He'd known Sarah's travel habits, her routines, her physical description in the specific and intimate way that a boyfriend knows a person. Sarah had always said the breakup was mutual, amicable even. She told me there were no hard feelings, but she said one other thing to Ramos in that kitchen that she'd never told me before. 6 weeks after they broke up, Marcus had called her from a blocked number and told her she'd made a mistake and that she would understand that eventually. She'd written it off as a wounded ego. She hadn't thought about it since. The planted detail was there all along, buried in ordinary life. I just hadn't known to look for it. Ramos pulled Marcus Webb's name into the investigation. It took 11 days to trace the connection. The method wasn't obvious. Marcus hadn't hired Denise Arroyo directly. He'd paid into a forum, one of the ones that operate in the gray margins of the internet, where people with grievances and resources connect with people who have skills and no scruples. His entry on the forum was flagged because he'd used a device fingerprint that matched one of the accounts already under investigation in the broader network case. A digital trace so thin it was almost nothing, but almost nothing is still something. When Ramos called Sarah to tell her, she didn't cry on the phone. She came home that night and sat in the kitchen for an hour without eating dinner. I sat across from her. I didn't try to fill the silence with anything useful. "I thought he was a good person," she said finally. "I thought I knew him." "You knew the person he showed you," I said. "That's different." She nodded slowly. "It doesn't feel different." I didn't tell her she was wrong, because she wasn't entirely. Marcus Webb was arrested at his apartment in the Inner Sunset on a Wednesday afternoon in mid-July. Sarah and I didn't know it was happening until Ramos called Sarah's cell. The charge was conspiracy to commit identity theft, and several other counts I can't recall precisely. He hadn't been the one to turn the key in our door, but he'd been the one to draw the map. Sarah wanted to face him directly. She wanted to say something to him in person, had talked about it for 2 weeks, had rehearsed fragments of it out loud in the living room. Ramos told her to wait for the court process. Her attorney, a sharp woman named Diane Chu, who'd handled identity theft cases before, told her the same thing, but she didn't wait for the courtroom. She found out through a mutual friend that Marcus was using the week before his preliminary hearing to stay with his brother in Daly City, supposedly to keep a low profile. She drove there on a Sunday afternoon, and I went with her because she didn't ask me not to. He answered the door in a gray t-shirt and gym shorts, and for a moment he just stared at her. Then his face did something complicated. Not guilt exactly, but recognition. Like a man who has been waiting for a particular knock and is surprised only by how long it took. "You came," he said. "Of course I came." Sarah's voice was very steady. "I want to know why." He tried the first version, which was denial. He didn't know what she was talking about. Whatever had happened wasn't connected to him. She was drawing conclusions that didn't have basis. Sarah let him finish. Then she said, "They found the forum account, Marcus. They matched the device. It's done." He tried the second version, which was justification. She'd heard him. She'd ended things without warning, which wasn't true, but he'd constructed his own version of events and had been living in it. She'd taken something from him. He'd just wanted to. He'd wanted to see what would happen. It wasn't supposed to be violent. Nobody was supposed to get hurt. "You sent someone with a fake identity into my home," Sarah said, "into the place where I sleep, to steal my accounts, my financial information, my life. It wasn't like that. Tell me what it was like." He didn't have an answer to that. His brother appeared in the doorway behind him, and Marcus glanced back, and in that glance was everything. The awareness that someone else was watching, that the version of himself he'd maintained for his family and friends was standing in the doorway too, and that it was not going to survive this. "I don't have anything else to say to you," Sarah said. She wasn't crying. Her voice hadn't wavered once. "I just wanted you to have to look at me while you still know my name." She turned and walked back to the car. I followed her. We didn't speak until we were back on 101 heading north, the city coming coming back into view. He looked smaller than I remembered, she said. People usually do, I said, once you understand what they actually are. The aftermath spread outward the way these things always do. Sarah's sister in Honolulu was shaken. She'd been named in some of the preparatory research Marcus had done, her address logged as part of the profile. She flew up to San Francisco for a week in August, and the three of us spent most of it in the apartment cooking bad pasta and watching old films and not talking about any of it directly, which was its own kind of processing. Sarah's parents, who lived in Sacramento, drove up the weekend after the arrest was public. Her father sat in our kitchen with his hands flat on the table for a long time without saying anything. He was a man who had built most of his adult life on the premise that you could protect your children from the world if you were careful enough. This broke something in him that I don't think fully repaired. Her mother kept asking questions that didn't have good answers. How had no one noticed? How had this been allowed to happen? How does something like this just happen to a person? I didn't know how to explain that it happens to people precisely because they are open and trusting and don't move through the world expecting to be cataloged and replicated and used. That the thing that made Sarah vulnerable was one of the best things about her. Marcus's attorney entered a plea in early October. He avoided the longest potential sentence, but accepted significant prison time, 32 months, plus restitution to all parties in the broader network case. Denise Arroyo cooperated with the investigation and received a reduced sentence in exchange for providing the full scope of the operation's methods and contacts. The network itself was larger than any of the local reporting captured. 312 identified victims, 47 active profiles in various stages of preparation when the investigation shut it down. 47 people who had been studied, photographed from a distance, had their voices recorded on fake survey calls, had their accounts mapped, and their travel dates noted, and who had no idea. Sarah changed all her accounts in the week after the arrest. New passwords, new security questions, new recovery emails. It took 4 days and made her cry once, which she did in her room alone and came out from with red eyes and said nothing about. She put a new lock on her bedroom door. She got a peephole camera for the front door that sent an alert to her phone whenever there was motion in the hallway. She stopped telling strangers about her plans. I watched all of this happen and felt two things simultaneously that didn't resolve into a single emotion. I was glad she was doing it. I was sad that she had to. Carol Patton, for her part, became briefly famous in the building as the woman who'd stopped something terrible. She was embarrassed by this in the way of someone who had not done it for recognition and genuinely couldn't see what the fuss was about. She said when Sarah tried to thank her properly one Thursday morning over coffee that she'd simply paid attention, that paying attention to the people around you was not heroism. It was just what neighbors were supposed to do. The case closed in November. Sarah and I had a quiet dinner to market. Nothing ceremonial. Just the two of us at the table with a bottle of wine and some roast chicken from the place on Market Street. We didn't make speeches. We talked about her sister, about a trip Sarah was thinking of taking in the spring, about nothing in particular. There is a version of this story where the ending is triumphant, where the arrest and the plea and the sentence close everything up neatly and everyone comes out stronger. I think about that version sometimes, and then I think about the more honest one. Something was damaged that doesn't fully repair. Not between Sarah and me. We're fine. We're still living in that apartment. Bruno still sleeps at the foot of Sarah's bed when I let him. But something in Sarah, the particular quality of openness she'd had, the willingness to tell a stranger on the bus where she was heading, to say her sister's name out loud in a lobby, that's different now. More measured, more contained. I don't think that's entirely a loss. I understand why she holds herself closer. But I miss the person she was before she had a reason to. She was not naive. She was just kind. Those are not the same thing, and the world kept treating them as if they were. That is what I keep coming back to. Months later, sitting in the same apartment where I heard a key I recognized turn in a lock and felt my body go cold before my brain had processed why. Someone spent months turning Sarah's openness into a door they could walk through. They studied her, cataloged her, sent a stranger to stand in her home. They almost got away with it because of a woman in 3B who paid attention, because of a dog who didn't wag, because of a detail about a city and a sister and an ocean view that wasn't there. That's not her. 3 words, 11 letters, all caps. I've thought about how close the margin was, how easy it would have been to not have Carol's number in my phone, to have left Bruno at the sitters that week, to have not known that Sarah's sister lived in Honolulu and not Maui. How many of those 47 profiles in preparation had no margin at all? How many didn't have a Carol, or a Bruno, or a detail wrong by one island? Sarah is in the kitchen right now making coffee. I can hear the grinder. In a few minutes, Carol will knock twice, the way she always does, and Sarah will pour 3 cups and they'll sit at the table by the window where the morning light comes in at that particular angle, and they'll talk about whatever Carol's been reading or whatever Sarah's working on or nothing important at all. I'm glad for it. Every Tuesday. Every Thursday. I'm glad for the ordinary weight of it. The cups on the table, the steam off the coffee, the knock that means exactly the person it sounds like.